The world of AI is changing really quickly, and I wanted to show you how I used a Nuxt.js app to connect to a Claude 3 API to do some really interesting things with images. So I'm going to walk you through how I did that in a bit, but first let me show you the app I created. First, if you haven't heard, this new version, Claude 3, just came out. It's a new next generation model, and what's really interesting about it, they ran a bunch of benchmarks, and they found out that Claude 3 is pretty good at a lot of things, especially with vision. So there's this Claude 3 Opus, this Claude 3 Sonnet, and Claude 3 Haiku. Today, we're going to use Claude 3 Sonnet. I'll show you how I set that up. And I wanted to really test out this new vision capabilities. So one thing you can do now is you can upload images with into the large language model, and then you can ask different prompts to it and get different outputs. And one thing it says is it's pretty good at math, at documents, science diagrams, charts. So I wanted to see how well it worked. And so let me show you my findings. So here's the app I created. I'm using AWS Amplify Gen 2 in the back end. I'm using Amazon Bedrock that's connected to this Claude 3 large language model. And the way this works is I can give it any sort of prompt that I want, and then I can upload an image and I can ask some questions about it. Let's imagine you need to add alt text to something. You want it to generate alt text. So let me show you how that would work. So I'm gonna click choose file here. I got a bunch of random different pictures. These all have royalty-free licenses that I can use. So let's imagine that we just wanna grab a cat here. I'm gonna ask a question to see if it can determine what this is first. Can you explain what this is? And so what this is doing, it's now going out and grabbing that information from the large language model so it can display here at the bottom. Okay, so it says this image depicts a curious cat interacting with small flower plant outdoors. And then it goes into a lot of detail about what this image is, which is pretty cool. What happens if we want to create alt text for it? Can you create alt text for this in 10 words or less? So now I can use this. Let's say I needed to add alt text for my website. Well, here it is, a curious black and white cat sniffing a small flower on a rocky surface. I can also ask it, what are the common colors in the image? And then it'll tell me what the common colors are. The common colors present in the image are black, white, and shades of gray. The cat has a black and white fur coat. So let's try a few other examples to see how well it does. So I'm going to choose file here, and let's look at this dog. So this is a Labrador, and I want to see, can I determine what the dog is? What type of dog is this? I can even say, give a couple of guesses. Just in case it doesn't get it right in the first time, maybe it can give us a couple more. Based on this image, this appears to be a golden retriever or mixed breed dog with golden retriever characteristics. It's close. It's not a golden retriever, it's a lab. It kind of looks like a golden retriever. I guess if you look at this straightforward, it's close, but not quite. I would say that I'd give it a pretty good score still. Let's try a celebrity. So here's a picture of Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things. Let's see if it can determine who she is. Who is this celebrity? The image shows a smiling blonde woman speaking to microphones. It doesn't know who she is, but I can give it a hint. She's on Stranger Things. Let's see if that helps fix the problem. And it says that it's unable to find, but I'm assuming maybe if we give it more prompts or more hints, it could figure it out. Let's see if it can identify what this is. So this is the famous Reno Arches. That's where I'm from Reno, Nevada. These are in our downtown area. We have the slogan that we're the biggest little city. Let's see if it can identify what this is. Where is this image from? So this is great. It actually knows it. This image appears to be from Reno, Nevada. It shows the famous Reno Arch, the biggest little city in the world. Pretty interesting that it is able to grab all this information. Let's try one more. Let's see here. This is an image of Paris. Looks like this. So let's see if it's able to detect it. Where is this from? Yeah, this is a stunning panoramic image, appears to be viewing of Paris, the capital of France. This is really interesting. So it's able to describe the image. It determined where it was. I'm pretty impressed by Claude V3 in this demo I created. So let's take a look at the code. We're going to take a look at this project at a high level, and then we're going to look into the code and see a few examples of how this is all put together and how it's talking to this Claude API. But first, I want to say this is all built using the Amplify Gen 2, which is in developer preview as of this video. And so what this does is it's a way for front-end developers to create full stack websites. And I'll show you exactly how that works. If you go to docs.amplify.aws/gen2, I'll leave a link in the description. You can follow the get started guide. So most of the things I have in this video are actually just pulled directly from this guide. And I'll explain that in a moment. I think a good way to start before we jump into the code is just to have a high level understanding of what this app is about. So on the right hand side here, this is the AWS side, but we'll imagine that we want to start with the front end. So we have the front end here, and it's using Nuxt.js. Now, one really important thing with this front end is that we're using a library called AWS Amplify. So this is going to be our JavaScript library, and it's going to help us talk to our back-end resources. We're also using that Gen 2 library as well, so we'll just make a note of it here, Gen 2, just to give us an idea that we're also using that library. Now, in the AWS side, we're going to use a couple of services to store data, to talk to this Amazon Bedrock, which holds the Claude large language model that we're going to be talking to. So first thing is we're going to use this thing called AppSync. AppSync is a managed GraphQL service, and the way it works is you create these schemas or different models of your data that you want to connect with. For example, you might have a schema that is for to do, so you might have content is done, which is a Boolean. And one nice thing about AppSync, and when you have it connected with our AWS Amplify, is we create all the resolvers for you. That includes the create, read, update, and delete. Now, the AppSync service in the backend uses something called DynamoDB. And DynamoDB is essentially our database. It's our document database that the AppSync service can connect to and save information. The AppSync service connects to DynamoDB, and it talks back to the AppSync service. Now, typically, if we just wanted to have a very simple, straightforward app, we may just only need these two services. The AppSync actually automatically creates the DynamoDB service for us. We don't have to do that for us. If we use the Gen 2 library or Amplify libraries, all this gets provisioned, and I'll explain how that works. However, in our situation, we want to talk to Amazon Bedrock, which holds this Claude large language model that we want to talk to. So out of the box, AppSync actually has some really nice features to create what are called custom resolvers. So instead of just talking directly to our DynamoDB, we can create resolvers to talk to other AWS services. We can even create JavaScript resolvers. We can do a lot of things here. So we're going to imagine right here, this is going to be our resolver. I'll just put R for resolver here. So we'll create a custom resolver that instead, when you do queries to it, it'll actually go to a different service, and that will be our Lambda function. And so this Lambda function is a serverless function that we can pretty much do any kind of compute type work that we want in it. We can connect to other AWS services, we can connect outside of AWS, we can do anything we want. And what we want through this Lambda resolver is that when we do queries, that it connects to our Bedrock service. So I don't have an icon for the Bedrock service, so we're going to have to just imagine this is it. And so this is the Amazon Bedrock. And inside Amazon Bedrock, we have all these different large language models that have API interfaces that anybody can use. So the one we're going to use is 3, which recently just came out. And so the way this works is the Lambda function will talk directly to Amazon Bedrock, and then Amazon Bedrock will return whatever data it wants. So we can send prompts, we can send those images as base64 encoded images, and then it will talk back to the Lambda. And then the Lambda will then use the AppSync resolver to go back to the AppSync, and then that will be sent back to the user. So essentially, these are all the services that we're going to be using in today's video. We're going to use this AppSync service that uses DynamoDB, Lambda, and Amazon Bedrock. Another thing we could possibly use, and I added the icon here, is Cognito. Cognito is an identity provider, and it allows us to store user information when someone logs in and logs out. But we can also have restrictions on authorizations for users. So maybe certain users are only able to access AppSync, or maybe they only have certain things that they can do. We're not going to use that. Today, we're just going to imagine that everybody is public. Now that we have a high-level overview of the system that we're creating, let me show you a little bit about how we're going to do it. So if you go to the docs and you just look up Nuxt, there's a whole section on using the Amplify Categories API plugins for Nuxt. And simply, you have to just copy and paste a few of these client and TS files into a plugins folder. So let's take a look at the Nuxt app in a little bit more detail. So here it is. On the right-hand side here, I have a Amplify folder, but I also have this plugins folder. These are the two files that I just copy and pasted in here, and this will allow us to talk to AWS services without any issues. These have code for if you're running on the client or on the server. Now there's a few things I did. As soon as I installed this new Nuxt 3 app, I ran this command called npm create amplify at beta. So we are a newer service, so it is in developer preview. It's still in beta at this time, but when you run this command, it will scaffold out a few folders for you. And so if we look here, there's these Amplify folders, this Amplify folder here, and it'll have this auth, data, and functions. So this auth right here, this is all boilerplate that it automatically creates for you, is that identity provider. We're not really using it, but it automatically created it for us. And this is where you can configure your Cognito settings. You can do social logins, federated logins, things like that. What's more interesting is that it creates this data folder. So this is kind of a high-level abstract way of creating that schema and models that you need for AppSync to be able to talk to the DynamoDB database. And so this has everything you need to get started with that. You can also drop down if you need to into what we call the CDK layer, which is our cloud development kit. But let me just give you a quick overview of what this is doing. So right here, we're creating a new schema that says we're creating a new custom type, which is called Bedrock Response. So that means it's returning a type content. And then we're creating this new image Bedrock, which is this custom query, this custom resolver, and it's expecting that we send it this base64 image and a prompt, and then it returns that Bedrock response, that string. And then we're telling it to be public, and then we're going to have it basically talk to this Claude v3 function. And this is all boilerplate that normally comes with it, that just essentially says, well, this is all going to be public. We're going to use the API key. And that API key lasts about 30 days, then you have to reinitialize it, otherwise it'll stop working. And then we have this cloud function here. So if we look back at our folders and we go back in here into our functions, we have two files in here. One's called the handler file and one's called the resource file. This handler file is the actual Lambda function code that's going to be running on the server. And so here's essentially what it's doing. It's talking to our Bedrock service on US East 1. We're taking that data that's coming for it. It's a base64 string of characters, and we're grabbing some metadata out of it so that way we know if it's an image or it's base64. And then we're running it through this Bedrock invoke model, and we're using the latest Sonnet model ID. And then we're sending the string, and this is all in the documentation if you have to look this up. And it's saying, hey, we have two types, send an image, here's the image, and here's the prompt that we're going to send. And then we receive a response back and we return it. And then we have this resource file, and this just kind of defines that function that we're going to use, and we put the name of it in here. And our service will know how to do it. And then we have a backend file, and most of this was auto-generated for us when we ran that npm create command, but we added in this Claude function, and then this just tells it to grant it access to the model. So that Lambda function can actually access that model. And so this is one thing you can do is if you have resources and you need different access levels that we need to go above and beyond, you can write it directly inside here. You're almost dropping down a layer to something called our Cloud Development Kit layer, but you can do something like this as well. So to actually run the code that we just saw, you just have to run npx amplify sandbox, and this will create an ephemeral environment for you so that you can run tests and run everything locally. So right now I have that done right here. The ephemeral environment's running, and I can use it at any time. One thing I also like to mention is to be able to access the Claude large language model that just came out, you'll have to go into the Amazon Bedrock inside your AWS console. And then you'll need to look for, in this list here, the Anthropic Claude 3 Sonnet, and it probably says need access. If you click Manage Model Access at the top, you can then check mark it, click Save, and then get access to that model. So this one just came out, It's pretty new. It's well worth trying out if you haven't already. After you're testing with the ephemeral environment, if you like to actually push this to production, you can go into the AWS Amplify or search for AWS Amplify in here. And then you can choose this new public preview, which is to try Amplify Gen 2. And this will come to a screen which you'll then be able to connect your Git repository up to, and then you can push the code and it will provision the whole backend for you. I'm not going to do that in this video, but I just want to give it a shout out if you want to complete this right now. It is in developer preview, but it's worth trying out. So those are some of the most important things in this app. And the way I'm actually talking to this backend is if I go into my index.vue file, I literally only have one component in here. I'm using this generate client, which is from that AWS Amplify library, and I'm passing this schema in. And if you saw earlier, if we look back at that resource file that we had in the data, this schema is actually being sent over. So our front end knows exactly what parameters and what the backend is expecting. So if we look back here, I'm using this generate client. And when I'm doing a submission, I'm sending it the base64 image and the prompt. And I'm just using Nuxt and Vue, using V models to grab that data. For the base64 image, there's a really quick way to do that. You can use this reader, which is a new file reader. It's run on the client side, and it turns it into a base64 image that I can then send to the backend. And then I have lots of different Tailwind code here to make sure that it looks somewhat nice on the screen. So that's essentially everything we're doing here to create this app. If you guys have any particular questions on it, please leave a comment below. I'll get back to you. This was a really fun project. It didn't really take more than just a couple hours just to look up the documentation put together. If you guys need any help, just let me know. Leave a comment below. Thanks.